For being here. And welcome to the Spahr Center's LGBTQ plus best practices for inclusive environments for middle and high school parents and caregivers. So happy to have you here tonight. My name is Michelle Drake, and I'm with the Marin County Office of Education. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. The webinar is being simultaneously interpreted in Spanish. Thank you, Margarita Lopez. Hola y bienvenidos a las mejores prácticas LGBTQ+ de the Spahr Center para entornos inclusivos para padres y cuidadores de escuelas intermedias y secundarias. Este webinar se transmite simultáneamente en español. Haga clic en el botón de interpretación del idioma que aparece en su pantalla si desea escuchar esto en español. Muchas gracias a Margarita Lopez, que es nuestra intérprete esta tarde. So we had over 60 people register for this evening session, and we had about the same amount at the last week's session with our elementary school parents and caregivers. Our community truly cares about this and clearly wants to learn more about how we can actively advocate for our LGBTQ+ students. It's important that they know that we see them, we honor them for who they are. And I mean, if you can imagine, even in Marin County, even in the state of California, there is still so much more work that we have to do to work on this. And I like to say we get to do this, that we get to do this amazing work. I'm going to introduce our two panelists this evening. Mavi Pillaton is the Training Institute Manager at the Spahr Center, which is an amazing nonprofit organization here in Marin County dedicated to serving, supporting, and empowering the LGBTQ+ and our HIV communities. Mavi coordinates, leads, and develops curriculum for LGBTQ+ cultural awareness trainings. They deliver these trainings to schools, to healthcare providers, social service agencies, government agencies, and many other types of organizations. I love that it is beyond education. It is with all facets of Marin County. It's truly extraordinary. Mavi is currently working in several of our Marin County districts, running these sessions on LGBTQ+ best practices for building inclusive environments, trainings for staff around the county, which is amazing. They grew up and currently resides in Marin with their spouse and stepdaughter. So welcome, Mavi. Our next panelist, Jenna Barkin, is an author, educator, and mother. She and her husband raised their family in Marin County, and her youngest child is transgender. Jenna has worked as a preschool teacher, director, a yoga instructor, and is now the family programs manager at the Spahr Center. Jenna currently supports transgender youth and their families as a facilitator of parent support groups and workshops, and she also does parent coaching. Her book, He's Always Been My Son, was a #1 bestseller on Amazon and continues to be a valuable resource. So welcome, Jenna. Welcome, Mavi. I hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you all being here on a Thursday evening at 6 o'clock. Jana, do you want to say hello too?
Same, Jana. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm actually going to add that here in the Zoom. And it is so nice to be with you all. I wish I could see all your faces, but so appreciate that. I know that at least some of us are able to gather tonight and talk about this really important subject. So let's get going.
Yeah. So I am going to share my screen. Okay. Does that look good? I can't see everyone's face, but Jana, does that look good? Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thank you, Michelle, for that wonderful introduction. Michelle's always so good at the introductions, just like captures all the important pieces. And I just wanted to reiterate that we're from the Spahr Center, which is a nonprofit here based in Marin County, actually in Corte Madera. And we provide all kinds of really, really wonderful programs and services for the LGBTQ+ community in Marin and those living with and affected by HIV. And as Michelle said, we do a lot beyond just going into schools and providing education on that. We go to all kinds of different places and try to support the community in a lot of different ways. So thank you all again for being here tonight. And so I like to also just kind of start out by saying, giving like a brief shout out to MCOE, Marin County Office of Education. Michelle is with MCOE, as she said, and this workshop and so many other workshops would not be possible at all without MCOE, and specifically Michelle. Michelle has been a really, really wonderful resource for us and an amazing advocate. And because of MCOE and a social emotional learning grant they have through California Hope, we're able to provide workshops like this to parents and also to schools and educators and all kinds of people. So definitely want to thank them because we wouldn't be here without them. So shout out to them. Yeah, so I mean, we start with like a little bit of an introduction, even though Michelle kind of already introduced us, but these are our official staff photos, look super fancy. As Michelle said, my name is Mavi. I also go by Maggie, and I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the training institute manager at the Spahr Center. It's a fairly new role, and it's been really fun to kind of figure out what I do and what I can do. And it's been really exciting to kind of come up with these workshops like this, and to work with amazing people like Jana. So Jana, do you want to add anything as like an intro or something?
Here we go. I am also in a fairly new role as the family programs manager, and I'm just super grateful to be expanding my work at the Spahr Center. And I've been here with the center for almost 7 years now, started as a volunteer, starting these parent support groups for parents of transgender, non-binary, and gender expansive and questioning children of any age. It's a really long title, but I started as a volunteer 7 years ago, and then the groups have been consistently running since then. And about 4 to 4.5 years ago, I came on staff as the parent group advisor, and then we expand to also include grandparent groups and some lunch and learn educational experiences, having to do specifically with gender and gender identity. And now I have been so grateful to be able to do the family programs manager role, and that has been expanding our programs to include programs that are specifically geared for elementary age school kids and their families. That includes LGBTQ families. It also includes families with perhaps LGBTQ children. So more on that as we go.
Thanks, Jana. Yeah, we'll definitely provide you all with some more information on some of the programs we have and ways to get involved and all kinds of stuff near the end. But hopefully that gives you kind of a brief little intro on what each of us do at the Spahr Center, and then hopefully you get a better idea as we go along. So let's see. So I like to start off, Jan and I like to start off with like a check-in question, and we came up with this one. And if you can put in the chat the answer to this question, we just want to start off by getting our minds going, getting those brains working. So the question is, can you name 3 historical figures who were transgender? If you can't, you could just put no, and that's fine too. Oh yeah, Jana can. That's great.
I just thought I'd start the chat, you know?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Jana can, yay. But yeah, if you can name 3 historical figures who are trans, you can put it in the chat. Or like I said, if you don't, that's okay too, and you can just say that as well. So we'll give it a couple minutes and we'll see what people say.
Queen Christina.
Oh, Queen Christina of Sweden. Wow.
Queen Christina of Sweden. Gotta look her up.
I was gonna say yeah, wow. I mean, you just taught us something. At least me. I'll speak for myself. Cool. Okay. That's okay if you can't. Yeah. You can think of one. Good.
1600s. And very interesting.
Oh, Layla, no need to be embarrassed that you can't. I think Jana, I think we said this in the workshop last week, but I think both of us couldn't for a long time, or maybe even up until this slide. We were like, what? Yeah, what is 3? What are the names of 3 people?
Yeah, I would say certainly I wouldn't have been able to until I started seeking out more information about being transgender and what it means and who is. But I had heard of some people because I grew up with Sonny and Cher, and Chaz
Yes.
Bono transitioned in adulthood. And, Chaz was one of my as a little girl myself, icons, and because Chaz got to be on TV with parents and stuff. So, but yeah, I knew of some athletes, Renee Richards, of course, Caitlin. Wow, look at all these amazing leaders.
Yeah, so here, yeah, Laverne, great example. And yeah, and I think this is a theme that we'll kind of see throughout this workshop, of that, like Jana said, like so much of what we have learned individually has been like self-education and just putting in that time and effort to learning about it. And then also being like, what classifies as like historical figure or not? Like, could it be like a current person who's like an influencer in some way? Or, this question could go a lot of different ways. And I put up all these names, and obviously this is not comprehensive in any way. But here's a list of names all the way from like the 1300s or maybe even earlier, to a little more present day, to like the Stonewall riots and Compton's cafeteria riots. So actually a lot of historical figures who are trans, but I think a lot of the reason why some of us don't know it is because we weren't taught it. So it's not necessarily because we haven't sought out that information, but it just hasn't been available to us. And so again, that's going to be kind of a common theme, I think, throughout this workshop, but I appreciate you all engaging in that little check-in. And yeah. All right, so like I said, we did a workshop last week at the same time for elementary school parents. And so this one's for middle school, high school. And last week I showed various pictures of myself through kind of like elementary school years. So I had to shift mine a little bit for tonight's. I kept some of the same ones, but some are different too. But anyway, I like to show these pictures because a big part of this workshop and just this work in general is really about storytelling, and kind of understanding the experiences that different people of different identities have. So this is me a little younger than middle school. This is me about like 4 or like preschool age-ish. I was really into Lion King, so I just held my like Simba and Nala doll wherever I went. Loved wearing really cool bunny ears, apparently really into headwear. But yeah, I like showing that picture because this is elementary school and I didn't really have an idea of who I was. I was still kind of figuring it out, but those were some things that I knew. I loved Lion King and things like that. And then moving on to, so this is about middle school age. This is probably like, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade, somewhere around there, maybe 5th. So still pretty young. But I just remember, like, I look back at this picture and I think back to like playing soccer and how much I loved soccer. And I think about those memories. But I also just look at myself, and sometimes looking at old pictures of myself is really hard to do. And it's also sometimes just really hard to see my expression and not even really see myself. Now being a 31-year-old who identifies as queer and non-binary and multiracial, I feel very much myself at this age and at this point of my life. And so looking back and seeing these other parts and being reminded of these other parts really is kind of jarring in a way. I don't really recognize myself in some ways, and especially in this high school one. I apologize for how blurry it is. I had so much trouble finding a picture that wasn't super blurry, but this is like an old Facebook picture, so this is the best I could find. But this one even more so. Like I can see as I get older, like you can see my expression change. I can just feel the discomfort in my body that I was experiencing then. There's definitely elements of myself there. Like there's the goofiness, there's the joyfulness, there's the kind of like joking around, whatever. But like I can see it in my face. Like I see I see the pain. I see the pain in the pictures, and I don't see necessarily the pleasure. I don't really see, even if I'm smiling, I don't really see the pleasure, but I just see the pain and the difficulty. And it honestly was really, really hard looking through, especially like my high school pictures. It felt very, very uncomfortable, and I honestly had to stop at a certain point. So that's another reason why I don't have like a high res picture, because I was just like, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. So yeah, I just like to give that little preview of kind of where I've been and where I am now, and then the perspective I have as an educator, and hoping to kind of share my story with you all. And hopefully this could maybe shine some light on your students, or just, perspectives in general. So, and then Jana is going to share her story.
Yeah, thanks. Because my story is intricately woven with my sons. And so I am the mom of a transgender son. This is my guy. He's my youngest. So I have an eldest who is a stepson to me. So not born, but still my son, part of the family. But he didn't come to live with us till he was 13. And I often say that could be a whole nother book and a whole nother world to dive into. But we're here. And so then I have my firstborn, who's my daughter and is just a year behind you there, Mavi. She's 30. And then I have my son, who was born assigned female at birth. And if you don't know what that terminology means, that's okay, because that's what we're doing here. And Mavi is going to go way more into these different terms. And it won't be the deepest dive, but it will be a lot of great information. And then we'll be able to go deeper as we go together and see what really is emerging and what we want to know. And what's exciting, and also I want to acknowledge, is that, when I first started doing this work, there actually weren't that many trans people out there educating parents. And there's a lot of reasons why we could go into that, or why that happened. And we could go into that. But what I do want to say is thank you, Mavi, for being a person who is of held experience, telling us that you're non-binary, and then also being an educator to us. Because like you said, you go into the past, or you are welcoming people to have conversation here. This is a place where you can ask questions, and it's okay if you make mistakes here. And I just want to thank Mavi for being part of that, because it isn't always easy to be in that position. So thank you. And that is how I got really into this, is I realized that I couldn't name transgender historical icons, and I didn't know what this meant. And so I needed to go on my own journey of learning and discovery that parallel closely to my son's own understanding of his experience and what was really happening for him. As you can see on the left, I have a kiddo that's super into sports, was like this from probably 2.5, took the talisman, I call it, of his hat at around 3 years old, and really didn't go out of the house without it. And I looked around a room I was presenting in, and I noticed who was wearing baseball hats. And it was mostly the male identified people. And especially 20 years ago, there was somewhat less. It's not that women don't ever wear baseball hats. It's just that if we look around and we see who's wearing them all the time, and he saw that, and he wanted short hair. So you can see he has his short hair under his hat there. And also just noticing his look on his face. And perhaps just picking a word or a phrase that you notice about him. And again, this could be participation or not, but you're welcome in the chat. And this is just to place us together here in the experience. Is like, what do you read from this kiddo? And his name's Amaya. You said joy. Thank you. Yeah, I purposely chose this photo for my book because I felt like it really expressed his mischief. Yes, he'll like to hear that. Yeah, he was in comfort. Yes, he was very comfortable at that time. He was just really happy to be in his uniform, and it was actually a really hot day, but still, he loved. You can see he even has a tattoo. Can you see the tattoo on his right arm? Yeah, so that was all really important to him, and he loved all that, loved expressing himself that way. Perhaps we called him a tomboy, and there were years where that fit for him and then it didn't. And those were some pretty distressing years. He had a lot of struggle through his pre-puberty and puberty years, which are hard for so many kids. I know many of your kids in middle school struggle, especially socially. It's an awkward time. And especially for gender, non-conforming was a word we used to use more when my kid was young. Really depends on what groupings you're in and who you're talking with. But gender diverse is another word we might use for kids that just do not behave in what would society say are these ways of being, right? Our traditions. So he was outside those quote norms. And I wrote about it because I felt like it would be really important to help others understand what I learned along the way. And I also understand that there's a lot of great information out there right now. And there's also a lot of confusion. Like, we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about gender identity, and what does all this mean? So there was a lot of confusion for us in our family too. And there was a picture in the middle I could put in between these two where the light was not there, the joy was not. It would be hard to see those pictures too. But I think I will do it because it would be a good practice to remind me of how far we've come to where you can see him on the right again. And I think we could apply the same readings. It was his freshman year in college. He was launching. What parent doesn't want to launch their child from a place of stability and wellness and joy? So I am very grateful that I had all the tools and the privilege and the access to insurance and information that I had. And now we have even better information. And so Mavi's going to get right into it and help us all understand this more so we can just be of more support to LGBTQ kids, regardless of whether they're ours or not.
Yeah, Jana, that was very well said. And what you just said about the three pictures, like inserting like a middle picture, just actually reminded me that when I was showing my pictures, when I was showing that slide, I also, like the way I have my screen set up, I kind of also have like my face and your face visible. So it was actually kind of interesting looking at those three pictures and then seeing me now next to that, kind of in a variation. And you're right, that is a very powerful thing to see the progression and to see it's exciting to see me now and to like feel more empowered in my own body and to express myself in the way that I want to. So anyways, I really appreciate you saying that. And as Jana said, there is a lot of terminology to understand here, and there's a lot of kind of mutual understanding of language and things like that that need to be talked about in order to have these conversations. So just starting out with like the basic LGBTQ plus acronym. So you'll probably hear us say it thousands of times in this workshop and beyond. As you can see, these are the words that make up each letter of the acronym. The plus is obviously a very big category because it covers a lot of different gender identities and sexual identities that just aren't represented by a specific letter. And I also really like to point out in this that the definitions and kind of the understanding of a lot of these terms has really evolved a lot, especially within recent history, but also, of course, over the years and over history in general. So as you can see, oh, just kidding, that was jumping ahead. I just want to point out also that like these terms have evolved, and it's because of inclusivity. In order to make sure that everyone feels represented and everyone feels like they have a word that they can use for themselves, or they might choose not to. But it's just basically a way to make sure that everyone feels included and seen within this acronym. So there might be a time where you hear a word and it might mean something a little different to you than someone else. Maybe that's an identity that someone else holds, maybe it's not. But just understanding again, like there are a lot of complexities about the different identities we're going to talk about. So for example, with gender, which you kind of got a sneak preview of when I accidentally clicked that, gender is a very, very complex thing. So gender is actually much more than just the sex we were assigned at birth, or our anatomy, biology, all that kind of stuff. So there's really actually three kind of main dimensions of gender. The first one being body. So there's definitely an element of gender about your physical body, how you feel in your body. For example, with me, I felt very disconnected to my body. Certain parts of it, I felt like were mine and it was great, but there were other parts of me that felt like I was living in a different body, and that felt a little disconnected and dysphoric. But also there's the body element of gender could also be like how society genders you based on your body. That I could talk about that for like a whole workshop in itself. But yeah, there's a lot of different aspects of body that goes just beyond the sex that a doctor or a midwife assigns us when we're born. So kind of that in itself is a complex concept. Then there's social, which is really our gender expression. So how we express to the world what our gender is, whether that's through clothes or hairstyle or whatever. My hairstyle has changed several times in the last few years alone. So like that's certainly kind of a big aspect for me. And then identity is really kind of the internal piece. So like, how do I feel inside? If I was assigned female at birth, like, do I feel like a female? Do I feel like a male? Do I feel like a mix of both? Do I feel like neither? And then kind of like what words feel right to me? Do I want to use a label? What pronouns do I want to use? Do I want to use pronouns at all? There's a lot of different intricacies here. And as you can see, it's very complex. And so the other big part of LGBTQ plus is sexual identity. So you might have heard it as other words like sexual orientation or sexuality. I use the term sexual identity. I just find it's the most inclusive and the most encompassing. And really there are a lot of different elements of sexual identity as well. I included these three kind of guiding or like framing questions to kind of show you how it is very complex in each person. So for example, like, is someone attracted to other people at all? Because some folks aren't. How are you attracted to other people? Maybe it's emotionally, maybe it's sexually, maybe it's romantically, lots of different forms of attraction. And then to whom am I attracted? So are you attracted to one gender, multiple genders, etc.? So there are a lot of different a lot of different ways to express these identities and for other people to view them. But again, it's just understanding that we all experience the world and we all experience identities differently. And so just honoring the fact that we all have the right to define our identities for ourselves. So that'll be kind of something we come back to as well as we keep talking about this. So just to break it down a little more, just so you can hear some of the terms that we might be using as well. And as I put some of these terms up, I would love for you to kind of think about like, okay, which ones do I kind of have an understanding with? Which ones do I feel like pretty comfortable in my understanding of? And then what terms am I like very unfamiliar with? What do I need to learn more about and all that? And we might not be able to answer all of your questions about each term in this time, but hopefully, and no need to memorize the terms at all or anything, but hopefully this gives you an understanding of how broad and diverse gender is. It's not just male or female. So as you can see here, cisgender is a term that you'll probably hear us use or you maybe have heard before. Cisgender is simply a person who might use that term who identifies as the sex they were assigned at birth. So I was assigned female at birth. If I identified as female, I could use cis female or something like that. And then on the flip side, there's transgender. So transgender can mean a lot of different things. It covers a lot of different identities. But trans is basically the opposite of cis in the way that in some way someone doesn't identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. So maybe it's the opposite sex. Like, for example, if I identified as a male now, maybe I would identify as a trans male. But then there's also a lot of other words too that come into play, like non-binary, which is the term that I use, which can mean a lot of different things. It can mean that you just don't really identify with kind of traditional gender binary norms. Maybe there's like a fluidity in how you identify with your gender. Maybe you don't identify with any gender at all. There's so many different ways to have inclusive language for these identities. And again, it might be different for each person as well. And then also pronouns, we talk about pronouns so much when it comes to gender, and just kind of reiterating that pronouns are not your identity, or pronouns are not, they're not a gender. It's a really important, useful tool for us in our language to be able to show someone respect and use certain terms that they feel comfortable being referred to as, but pronouns are not an identity. They're just a piece of language that we can use. So you've probably heard a million times she, her pronouns and he, him pronouns. And then there are other ones that are more gender neutral, like they, them, like the ones I use, or even some neo pronouns that you can also see listed on here. They're basically just, neo pronouns basically just means newer pronouns. So pronouns that were developed after the 19th century. And there's also just kind of an understanding that gender neutral pronouns are something that we might not be used to, and that's okay. But historically, they have been used as singular pronouns. They, them has been used as a singular pronoun. And so it's not grammatically incorrect. It's not wrong. It just might require some practice, and that's okay. That's okay if it requires practice. Like, I know I still practice with it, and they're my own pronouns. So that learning never stops, basically. And then sexual identities, so straight or LGBTQ plus / queer. Queer has kind of become synonymous in a certain way with LGBTQ plus. It's been kind of taken back by the LGBTQ plus community as it had a very negative connotation, but it's been kind of taken back by the community in a really positive, welcoming, inclusive way. And then as you can see, again, there's a lot of different types of attraction here. So there might be certain sexual identities under, like, such as gay or bisexual or pansexual. And then there also might be romantic attraction. So that could be like aromantic or biromantic, etc. And so many more, as it says here on this slide. So again, we're not going to quiz you at all on any of these things, but just understanding that you can see even just language around these identities is complex, and there's a lot of nuances to it. So I'm going to pass it over to Jana, who's actually going to talk about.
And that's great, because I was just going to ask you, like, I see the word straight a lot, and I think another word for that could be heterosexual. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, you all, you've probably heard the terms heterosexual and homosexual before. I know that homosexual is not used a lot anymore, like in current recent history, just because there are much more inclusive terms and not as like anatomically, biologically scientific terms. So other terms for homosexual, for example, could be gay or queer, or, you know, all the other ones I listed. And then heterosexual, yeah, so I've heard that used as straight too. I've heard more and more people use straight versus heterosexual, but scientifically they're basically the same.
Yeah, it's really interesting how language evolves. And because for me, as someone who, like, hippie generation, I'm a little younger, but I am still a hippie. I was born in the 60s, but in that culture, straight is, you're a mainstream person that's not a hippie, right? So just another example of how words mean different things to different people. And that is why we don't label another person with words. We invite people to share their words. And that's a really interesting piece that I think we could get into about maybe how to be an ally. Do we talk about people's gender identities, things like that? So I'm kind of shelving that for right now. but I just want to make sure it's around, because words evolve, and a person might not like a word that is now used. I wouldn't call certain older gay men I know queer. They just would not like it. It's still very uncomfortable for them, and it's uncomfortable for some of the grandparents I work with. I work with 80-year-olds. They're like, I was taught that is just not a word to use, similar to the N word. I'm not using it. I was like, that's okay, but that doesn't mean that someone else doesn't get to use it if it has a different meaning for them. And especially within the culture, right? Which is like how we would talk about maybe how the N word is used, but I would not personally use it. All right, so more to unpack, but let's come to the slide present, which is about what LGBTQ plus inclusive education is, and some of maybe what it's not, which is a little bit about myth busting, especially in light of all the different legislation that's coming to up for this election. And Mavi's going to share that with us. But it's really important because it's so wonderful that in our communities, this is an important focus. And also it's the law in California that we have LGBTQ plus inclusive education. So what that looks like is developmentally appropriate education about different types of peoples and families. So that means that at every grade level, we're going to take an approach that is developmentally appropriate, which the teachers determine because they are educated and that is part of their understanding of children, that when things are invited in. And so we are always going to include information that there are many different types of families. And then as they get older, they learn more about that, just like they learn more about the complexities of the world, the more they get older. And we're going to always be inclusive of the people that are in our communities, and that we recognize that there might be people that are not in our communities that we're still going to recognize and include, and that the contributions of LGBTQ figures and their roles in contemporary society is integrated throughout all the subjects. So it's not just during LGBTQ month, but it's completely always. There will be writers across the curriculum that will be someone who is LGBTQ, and then there will be a mathematician or perhaps a scientist or et cetera, contributions that are highlighted. And this could be also in anti-racist curriculums, right? Which we want to really point out that we couldn't be doing LGBTQ plus inclusive education without also considering anti-racist curriculum, because there are so many levels of intersectionality and how different people are affected even within the LGBTQ community. Yeah. And coming back to that, this is about self-identification. Nobody is labeling anyone else. So I'm not telling someone when I educate about LGBTQ, oh, by the way, this really fits you. No, that's what we're not doing. What we are doing is encouraging the self-exploration. So that might look like having lots of photos in the room that represent lots of different ways of expressing gender. And we might, again, hear from all these different interesting people that then can give kids an experience of who they may be. And then they might try on a pronoun. And it's the law, and it's also a positive best practice to use a person's affirmed pronouns, that there are studies that show us that this enhances the well-being of people. And yes, it's true that they may not use that consistently, or they may not continue along the line to use it. But we know that it is supportive and protective to allow for this self-exploration. We're definitely introducing pronouns and vocabulary. We're not only introducing, like we say, we're teaching about it, we're exploring the language of gender like we're doing tonight, and we're including that in our curriculum. So these vocabulary words are then used in curriculum. Storytelling, when we're talking about people, using a variety of pronouns and acknowledging that these exist, and that this is this is important to learn. Even grammatically correct language is including they, them pronouns as a singular. So how do we teach that? How do we integrate that into our curriculums? We're discussing gender stereotypes. We're making sure that we're interrupting any type of discrimination or even microaggressions, which we'll talk about as we go on, what that means, and those little things like someone continually getting someone's pronouns wrong. We would be interrupting those, but also discussing gender stereotypes and how to perhaps express yourself in ways that feel right for you, even if they don't conform to society's gender norms or sexuality norms of the day. And in general, we really want to create a supportive environment for all students to thrive. And that includes students that may come from families that don't have understanding about what LGBTQ people and their lives are like, or perhaps have different ideas or different beliefs that may conflict a little bit with this information. And so switching to what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like, I'm starting at the bottom, telling families what they have to do or believe in their homes. We are going to give the information that's important because public schools support all students equally, and that is written into our law, California law. Also, it is the US law right now. Let's keep holding to that. It is part of the Biden administration executive orders, as they were when President Obama was in office. So we're also not trying to convince anyone to identify any certain way. Actually, we're not convincing anyone anything. We're presenting information as we understand it, as science understands it, and as we know, language and science evolves as time goes on. Doesn't mean that the science wasn't right for the time. We're not making judgments about someone's identities. We are simply making sure that everyone feels safe, seen, and supported. And we're not teaching students about age inappropriate topics. So what we teach to middle schoolers is going to be different than how we talk to high schoolers. And what information is gathered and given with regards to health education, which includes sex and gender education, it's all intertwined, is going to be different in middle school than high school, and could maybe even be individuated for each person, because everyone's journey is unique and we need different things at different times. I would like to pause just for a moment in case anyone has any questions about that. Please feel free to put them in Q&A or the chat.
I also want to mention that Jana mentioned a lot of things that we'll talk about more too. We'll talk about some of the laws and things like that coming up too. So if you have questions, we might answer it coming up.
Yeah, and we could also say that the Spahr Center has a wonderful document that is all about this, called Teach Pride Reach Wide, and it's a living document. We'll make sure we get that in the resources.
Exactly.
It's a great guide for inclusive practice. So yeah, there's no questions right now, so I think we can continue.
Okay, I'll keep going, and if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. And again, hopefully we might even answer it on the way. So, so to really kind of paint the picture for why LGBTQ plus inclusive education is so important, why it's so necessary right now, why it has been necessary, but why it's completely necessary right now. We have some statistics for you that are provided by the Human Rights Campaign, which, in case you don't know, is this very, very reputable, huge nationwide organization that provides a lot of really wonderful advocacy for not just youth, but LGBTQ plus folks all over the country. And they do actually a lot of like legislative advocacy as well. But so I want to present these stats that, again, are like pretty self-explanatory in the sense that I'll read them and it kind of tells the story right there. But this type of education is not just important for LGBTQ plus youth. I want to reiterate this. It's also just important for youth in general, because it really is supporting all identities. It's highlighting all identities. But specifically when you're looking at LGBTQ plus youth, so whether it's middle schoolers or high schoolers in this case, the Human Rights Campaign found that 1/3 of LGBTQ plus youth say their family is not accepting of LGBTQ plus people. So these are some messages that they're hearing at home that might make them scared or make them feel like they can't come out, or even just explore their identities. So then there's also kind of a positive messages element that's somewhat similar to that last one. So in this case, less than 1/3 of LGBTQ plus youth chose their family among a list of places where they most often hear positive messages about being LGBTQ plus. So again, that's somewhat similar to the last statistic. But it's also like, how is the LGBTQ plus community being represented at home or in school? Like, is the community being represented in a positive way? And is it like a positive understanding of the community and different identities and different historical figures and all that? And then continuing, so nearly half, so about 47% of LGBTQ plus youth say they do not fit in their community. So that can mean a lot of different things, but we know how important belonging is for anyone really, not just youth. But the fact that nearly half of LGBTQ plus youth don't feel that sense of belonging or don't feel like they fit in their community is really scary. That's a pretty jarring statistic. And then this last one here is about half of LGBTQ plus youth say they have an adult in their family they could turn to for help if they felt worried or sad, compared to 79% of non-LGBTQ plus youth. So, I mean, that's a pretty glaring statistic too, in terms of support. Are they getting support at home that they need? And do they feel comfortable asking for that support and for that extra help and guidance? So to kind of zoom in even further, so a lot of those stats were from surveys that were conducted nationwide, but this is from the California Healthy Kids Survey in 2019. And so this data is specifically about Marin County youth. So this data that I'm about to show you is specifically about sexual orientation or sexual identity. So it doesn't cover gender, but I think that these statistics still paint a really important picture of, again, why it's so important to provide this type of education in general, but also in Marin County. So as you can see, excuse me, for the left graph and the right graph, so for any truancy, not straight students, so that could be gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc., in grades 7, 9, and 11, all experienced a higher rate of truancy. And then they also, on the right, you can see all experience more harassment and bullying than their straight or heterosexual peers. In addition, I want to point out that last column in each section, so the not sure section, if that student is questioning or unsure of their sexual identity, that technically is included in LGBTQ plus as well. So that's an important number to keep in mind also, not just the not straight students, but the students that are unsure, they also have high percentages for both of these categories. And before I go to the next slide, I just want to give a brief content warning that the next statistics share some information about suicide and extreme mental health conditions. So I just want to provide that little content warning before I go to this next page. But similar here from the California Healthy Kids Survey, as you can see on the left, I'm not sure why grade 7 on the one on the left got messed up for not straight students. I'm not sure why that data wasn't available. But as you can see in all the rest of the icons, that not straight students, so LGBTQ plus in some way, considered suicide and experienced chronic sadness or hopelessness at a much higher rate than their straight peers. And same thing, if you look at the unsure category as well, those numbers are also very high, or in some cases are almost the same. So for example, like grade 11 on the right here, those numbers are very, very similar. So hopefully, again, this highlights how important it is in Marin County specifically, like where we live, where our students are going to school. And then kind of from a national perspective, as Jana was talking about, I'm sure we can update these stats, obviously, once in a couple of months, I'm sure there'll be even more information. But I just want to briefly highlight the fact that trans students and LGBTQ plus students and the community as a whole is being targeted in a lot of different ways. They're being attacked in various ways. As you can see on this national federal level, there was a record set in just 2 months, the first 2 months of 2022, there was a record set for 238 anti-LGBTQ plus bills filed across the US. A lot of these, about 65% of them were specifically anti-trans policies. But in general, all of these policies had something to do with LGBTQ plus folks. So restricting gender affirming healthcare, restricting trans inclusion in sports, restricting gender or LGBTQ plus inclusive education. That's what these bills are targeting. And you can see that in just 2 months, this year set a record versus other years that record was set in 12 months. So that's pretty jarring. It's a very relevant conversation right now, as you can see nationally. And then as Jana was talking about earlier, it's also important to look at that, but also recognize that in California, we have certain legal responsibilities as public schools or public school educators to provide this type of inclusive education. So I'm going to go over some of them, and then there are a couple federal ones, but just to kind of like briefly give you this picture that in California specifically, you can see here Seth's Law, School Success and Opportunity Act, and Fair Education Act. So that first one, Seth's Law, passed in 2012 and requires public school districts to update and enforce policies that protect students who are bullied based on their actual or perceived gender or sexual identity. The School Success and Opportunity Act was passed in 2014, and it requires California public schools to provide equal access to programs and facilities, et cetera, for students that is consistent with their gender identity. And then the Fair Education Act, this is a big one that was passed in 2012, requires public schools and educators to not only include LGBTQ plus topics in their curriculum, but also represent the contribution of the LGBTQ plus community positively. They can't promote any type of like discriminatory bias based on gender or sexual identity. So in California, it is the law to provide this type of inclusive, positive education around LGBTQ plus identities. And then federally, there are protections in various ways. There's Title VII, there's Title IX, and then hopefully there's future legislation that will come. And again, in a couple of months, I'm sure we'll have even more information. But as you can see, like some of this is nationally protected, even though some of it's threatened, but there's also a lot of California specific requirements. So it's not even necessarily a debate because it is a legal responsibility. And then I'm going to pass this off to Jana actually to talk about this slide and why it's so important to support identity development.
Yes. So I mean, I love that someone asked, is there curriculum to support this self-exploration? And so I put a few examples in the chat and some resources. And I just want us to look at this picture of this group of kids. And this is at the Spahr Center. We appreciate them letting us share their images. And I can see some real trans joy right there, not just trans, but LGBTQ joy right there. But they all have a trans flag of some sort in their hands. So I'm just going to go with that vibe right now. Or I could just say queer. That is some queer joy right there. And so, as we know, middle school and high school can be such a difficult time. It can be so hard to find your crew and to feel like you belong. And I remember that my son, then we were in the in-between years there, but I would say I was still considering him my daughter then. And I remember just him not coming home with a face that looked like that at that age. He was lying in his bed. At school, it was reported that he was having a good day. It took like every ounce of his energy to do that. And then he'd come home and just collapse on his bed. And although that was really, really difficult to see, he was finding what he needed by scrolling on YouTube. And actually, thankfully, there were people that are now around Mavi's age that were sharing their transitions. And I found them too. And so we were learning, though we didn't know it, we were learning at the same time. What's a secret is a heavy burden. I think we all can understand that. And our kids, like, we want them to be happy and healthy. I think pretty much every parent can agree on that, every carer. I know there's some parents that are direct parents, but there's also the main carer, or you're a co-parent, or you're a grandparent that is in main care. There's a lot of different relationships. But to affirm a child's right to define their identities for themselves is a way of supporting this, not just identity with regard to gender, but a self-understanding. So it's bigger than gender identity, but yes, gender identity is part of that. And what I learned is actually only one part of who my child is. Multifaceted person. One part is that he is transgender. And also seeking out experience that will expand your sense, especially if you're someone who has not been around LGBTQ community very much, and your child's sense of what's possible, stepping out of your comfort zone. And I've had some gay parents tell me, this was really hard when I came out when I was gay, and still I don't understand all of this about gender identity. And then I have some trans parents who have told me, I just want to know how to support my kid because I came out when I was already grown. I already explored and matured into adulthood. How do I help a young person perhaps not have to go through what I went through? And don't make assumptions about your own child's or anyone else's identity. And that's hard. We're gonna gender, and that's kind of human nature, but also we're expanding that. And even if we think of I think of how my parents would look at guys in my grade with long hair and earrings, and they just didn't know what to make of them, but that was the thing. Guys were wearing long hair and even some makeup. So let's not make assumptions though, just because we see a male person who was assigned male at birth, perhaps, or we might even know them because of school community, but then they're wearing nail polish or a dress. Well, we don't know anything more than they're enjoying wearing and exploring the dress and the nail polish. We still don't know that they're gay or they're transgender or and if we see someone in androgynous type looking clothing, that doesn't mean they're non-binary. And if they're wearing feminine clothing, it doesn't mean they're not non-binary, right? And that has to do with all these dimensions of gender. And it's tricky because you're gonna make assumptions, we all do. And so our kids might be the ones to say, by the way, my friend uses they, them pronouns. Then as supportive parents, allies, we're just gonna do our best to honor that. And we're gonna go into why that is so important for our kids. Going back to that, we want them to be healthy and happy, right? And mental health and our kids today is such an important topic, especially among LGBTQ youth. Let's use gender neutral inclusive language. Let's say, hey, friends. It's such a common thing in my generation to be like, hey guys, what's up? Hey guys. And I realized that just doesn't work for a lot of people. And even some of my very strong feminist friends could never get with that, right? And now my daughter and her friends are like, hey, bitches. And I'm like, oh, excuse my languaging. I hope that was okay. But, it's so common for them. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Don't use that with me, So let's use inclusive language like, hey, friends. Hey, I heard last night it was, hey, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. And I thought, well, that's kind of fun. It's still not fully inclusive, but it sure goes a long way. And it shows, we could say learners, we could say students. There's so many words. Hey, friends. Hey, y'all. I've been using that a lot. Every time I go to the South, it's reinforced. And we can normalize that mistakes are okay. So we can still hold ourselves accountable correct our mistakes and quickly move on. Don't make it about apologizing and asking the other person to then have to forgive us. We'll just correct it and move on. If I accidentally used he for Mavi, I would say, oh, they, and then I would just keep going. I wouldn't ask them to, I wouldn't give them a lot of reasons why, etc. Don't make it about me, basically. And then let's all continue to educate ourselves. I really consider myself a lifelong learner. I love that. I love being a lifelong learner. I love learning new things. And sometimes that's hard because I have to let go of what I thought to open up to what is. So the best thing that we can do is explore alongside our kids and perhaps even explore our own gender, even if we know for sure, oh yeah, I don't have any questions about my gender. Still, why? Why don't I question my gender? Why do I like to be called a woman? Why? So these are some interesting ways to explore and support identity development with our kids. Yeah, so many more, but let's stick with that and continue on. Oh, I see a chat. I'm just going to make sure if there's a question. Oh, yeah, Mavi was just reminding me, we can always get more resources. That's the great thing now, is that there really are so many resources. And I love exploring. And if you have a good one, you found a good one for your life, your family, your classroom, please share them. Like maybe you have a favorite book, things like this, because we're always looking for books to add. And in the Teach Pride, Reach Wide, there is a link to our book and film list, and we're always wanting to expand that. Okay, back to you, Mavi.
Thanks, Jana. Yeah, this presentation, I feel like we could have for like 3 hours. There's so many things we could expand on, especially like this slide alone. Jana, were you going to say something?
Well, I just realized it's already 7. So yeah, I'm just handing it to you and you're going to keep us working at a good pace.
Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate you all. Hopefully this is a good kind of like preview of all the things we can do. So I just kind of wanted, this is a great way to kind of start to wrap things up, that we want to support our children. We want to support the LGBTQ plus youth around us. And I think there can be sometimes a little bit of confusion around allyship. And I really like to use the phrase active allyship, because I think it really does imply that we need to be actively and consistently supporting and empowering and advocating for queer and trans people in our lives. So being an ally is great, but there needs to be kind of an implied action and a consistent effort, consistent education, all that stuff. And there are a lot of different ways to be an ally. It could be, again, your own education individually. It can be interpersonally. So like in your relationships with not just your kids, but like your friends and other people in your life, other community members. And then structural too, like just being aware, again, like you're not going to be able to fix all of this stuff in like one wave of your magic wand, but like just being aware of things and going into community spaces, whether it's a school and thinking like, oh, you know what? I don't really notice a lot of like pride flags or like LGBTQ plus representation, or even going into like a community space like a gym or something and being like, there aren't any gender neutral bathrooms here. Like that's kind of odd. And just really starting to think about that stuff and then having those conversations, like that is active allyship. That is super powerful. And then I also, when we're talking about active allyship, so as active allies, we also really want to be aware of intersectionality, which is a big term. And again, could talk about that for like an hour, but just really being aware that a lot of our identities intersect. We all experience the world differently because of our identities. And that can really pose a lot of unique challenges depending on what those identities are, if they're historically marginalized, all that stuff. So I think just being aware that like LGBTQ plus folks might experience some challenges or inequities because of their gender or their sexual identity, but there also might be other things that are magnifying that too, like their race, or if they have a disability, or their socioeconomic status, or so many other things. So you can see in this little identity wheel, and this is obviously not comprehensive, but there's so many things that make up who we are. And so when we're trying to support folks, we want to realize that there are a lot of different factors. And again, complexities, that's a word I'm just going to keep saying, that goes into that type of support. So we have these questions that I want Jana to be able to facilitate. And I know we're running short on time, so maybe we'll do kind of like a quick version of this. But after this, I will show you just some of the Spahr support in like programs and services we have, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. But I'll let Jana take this last part. Oh, Jana, you're muted.
Boom. Thank you. I must be tired. I keep forgetting to unmute. I have family members. This is a question that someone said. I have family members who are concerned about being, quote, too encouraging, like as though there's a risk of kiddos being talked into being queer or being more queer. So I guess there's a few things, and it really depends on the relationship and like you and yourself. So I would just say, I just don't know what is the problem. Like, I don't have a problem with my child being transgender. It's not like it was an easy journey. Part of that is the transphobia and homophobia that exists in the world. So for me, I would just say, I just don't know. I'm just encouraging my person to be a person, and they're letting me in. A really wise person encouraged me to encourage all of us parents to think of when a child comes out to us or just shows us who they are, we are invited into that. And if you see my friend in this picture at our one of our recent drag story times, this I'm not going to say the child's name, but child is non-binary and is 8 and is just in joy. And so was I too encouraging of my child so that my child now has a good mental health outcome? I hope I was encouraging enough. So we could say that, yeah, just, allowing them to be who they are, and we'll see where it lands. I could also just bounce it back and just say like, yeah, I'm just not worried about that. I'm here for them regardless. My father, may he rest in peace. He died like a couple of days ago, 25 years ago. So it's just like an intense time to be hearing his voice. And he said to me, I'll never turn my back on you. So what am I too encouraging of? And yeah, that I just don't believe I can make anybody anything. It's actually really hard to make our kids be anything they're not. If you've ever tried it as a parent, I think we all can relate to that. So I hope that helped. I know it could sound a little flip, but sometimes it's just like we got to like get our grounding into what really is our belief, and then we can go for it. I'm really grounded in that. It's easier for me to say, if that's not where you're at yet, then just know that you can just say, yeah, this is just our parenting style. And I really believe in just supporting my child to express themselves as the way they see fit. Yeah, and then that kind of leads into some of these thoughtful questions that we can then have more questions from. So let this be known as the Q&A. And I'll start with our question to all of us. If a friend came out to you as LGBTQ or queer, what would your first thought be? And you might want to put your answers in the chat so we can be yay, family, love that. Yeah. What else? Like, I feel really honored when people invite me in for their experience. I feel like trusted. I feel like I can be that I'm a trusted person. You appreciate this person is sharing, and you feel fine about it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Mavi said, I'm so glad you feel so comfortable and so safe with me. Yeah, I'd be grateful. Wonderful. Okay, now how about if your child came out to you or invited you in? How would that feel? I think that the wheels are turning right now. It's a little different. Friend, adult, right? They're free to be. We are generally people who want to see people for who they are in our county, in our country. I would be grateful and relieved to be let in. That's what one of the mamas said. And same, but with a little fear for them. Yeah. And I could add maybe a little fear for myself too, because it's not so easy. It depends, on what part of the LGBTQ sphere universe you are. There are some that have more privilege and it's a little easier. There's some communities where is easier. I would like to say that I'm grateful that my child grew up in this community, even at a time in the county, even at a time when there wasn't as much understanding, there wasn't as much willingness to do trainings like this. At the same time, there have been steps, and this is a year where we're really deepening, not just doing it, but walking the walk. And that's what I want. I want our community to be a place where all feel safe, seen, and supported. And yeah, you would feel fine, but want to make sure it's the right path for them. Yeah. And wow, isn't that tricky? Does any parent ever know for sure? The school your kid chooses, the people they hang out with, the places they go, the choices they make of what to study, all these things. And yeah, we see that you have to go. Thanks for letting us know. Yeah, you might feel anxious about the adversity and discrimination they will experience. And yeah, they may experience. I want to couch that. So yeah, absolutely. I feel that too. One of the last chapters in the book, I think it might be the last one, because I stopped writing when Obama was going to be not president anymore. And I stopped writing because I knew that something was changing and I could feel it in my bones. And it was deeply distressing, as I know other people felt that way, but I knew that this was going to change how things were going for LGBTQ people, especially trans people. And that has now been playing out. And there are anti-trans bills in so many states right now. So I do understand this worry and this fear. One of the people shares that when her child came out, well, I'm assuming her pronouns are she, her, and I shouldn't. So this person said, I feel sad that she didn't feel like she could tell me earlier and was struggling by herself. Yeah. And there's a lot of us parents that, as best and open, I was asking my child, you seem to really like when people call you a boy. Do you want me to just call you a boy? I don't know, was the answer. And that's because none of this education was done. He had no idea when he was experiencing this that this could actually be a thing, that we could actually adjust and we could simply change his name and his pronouns. We never change name, but that we could. And those are very affirming ways of supporting self-exploration that aren't permanent. We're not talking about permanent changes, though some people may need those. That's for a whole nother Zoom, right? But we could certainly answer some questions here. So yeah, I relate to parents, and some parents, if their kid is gay, that might be one level. And then if their kid is non-binary or transgender, these might be different levels. If you're from a community that's more accepting, it's going to be easier. If you're from a background that hasn't been accepting, or you've been taught that it's not right to be LGBT, then it might be harder. But we are here to support, and make sure, please, that you reach out to Spahr when you need support. Darlene is seconding Mavi's comment about empowering them to live their life as their most authentic self. Really, all I want from my kids for them to be loved, safe, and able to live authentically. Thank you. Yeah, I echo that. This idea of who will love my child. I think a lot of times when people learn their kids are queer, they're worried. Yeah, because who will love my child? Here's a couple more contemplative questions. Have you ever stood up for LGBTQ plus person being harassed? And that might be one that we take with us. And we just kind of sit with that, and we wonder, what do I need to know now? And what might I want to learn more of? And then we'll be able to continue this conversation. And deepen our understanding and perhaps our allyship together. And you are all allies simply for being here. So thank you. And then let's take some active allyship and put it to good use. I bounce back to you, Mavi.
Thanks. Yeah, I know we're almost at time, so I want to encourage all of you that if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat so we can answer it. And then I also, while you're thinking of questions or while you're typing, I really want to just put up this last slide, which is about so many wonderful things that we're doing through Spahr. You can find, we will be sending out these slides after as well, so you'll be able to access my email, Jana's email, any other information in the slide that you might have missed or you want to revisit. And then also our Instagram and our website are really great ways to know what's going on with Spahr. Our Instagram, literally, I'll go on our Instagram and I'll be like, I didn't even know we're doing that. That's so cool. So that's a really great way to know what's happening like week to week. And then we also, through Spahr, just to give kind of a little glimpse into some of the stuff that we do and what we provide. We do a lot of other trainings as well. So like I said, I'm going into a lot of schools around Marin County and training staff, talking to students. We're doing student panels where students get to speak about their experiences in Marin schools. Michelle and I are planning a youth summit that'll be in the spring. That's really exciting. We're going to have more parent education trainings as well. Okay, October 27th is today, so yay. And then we're going to be doing more in the spring. So if you want to attend those, we would love to have you. And then Jana spoke a little bit about the family groups. I'll give her a chance to speak about that in a little bit too. But I also want to mention we have really wonderful youth groups. We have a middle school group that meets every Tuesday from 4 to 5 at Spahr. And then we have a high school / like teen group that meets right after that. We provide mental health support. And then lastly, I just want to mention that on December 6th, we have a very special guest who I'm super excited about. He's a friend of mine and we went to grad school together, and he did his entire thesis on gender inclusive Spanish. So he is going to be doing a presentation on December 6th on Zoom. So similar to this, and we'll continue to share out details as we get more, but that's a really exciting training that I hope you all can come to. And Jana, if you want to mention anything about your groups or anything else, then go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mentioned briefly that I offer parent and grandparent support groups. They're separate groups, but grandparents are also welcome at the main support group. So are any family members, friends of yours who might want to be there in support of you. And it's a discussion and support group that I facilitate. And then we have a separate grandparents group, which is a super special group. And our website has all the information. The parent group's 7 years old this December, and we have over 350 people on our mailing list. So you are not alone if you're out there needing this. And many that have graduated and gone on to be wonderfully grown adults, and also some people that have adult children that have come in. So they are already living life. We have Sparkle events. These Sparkle events are meant for families with young children. Like I mentioned before, we have park events with a partnership with the Marin County Parks. We have wonderful experience out in nature. So look for that. And we also have art on once a month for this age group on the second Wednesday of the month. And it's brand new. And so it's a small group. And I would love to have your kiddos as part of that. Though most of your kids are middle and high school, I know there might be a couple that have elementary school age, and they don't have to be LGBTQ identified. They can be allies too, or they can just be, have parents who are LGBTQ. And I know that that's a whole nother piece of conversation that is another important thing, that we support those kids. Kids that have LGBTQ parents have a struggle too that we don't often talk about. And I'd like to bring that in sometime, Maddie. So I want to go back to you because there's a great question that I think you with held experience would be better to answer.
Sorry, I'm looking. Did I miss it?
Can someone who is non-binary stay that way for their whole lives, or is it more likely that they will at some point become trans? So there's a few layers to that.
Yeah, that's a hefty question. And again, I wish I had more time to answer it. So actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen too, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, cool. Yeah, so sorry, I just knocked over a water bottle. So I would just say, we've talked about how identities, whether it's gender identity, sexual identity, there is an evolution in understanding of your own identities and of other identities. But identifying as a certain way at a certain point doesn't necessarily mean that's going to lead to something else. Like being non-binary isn't necessarily a precursor to being trans later on in life. I think it's a similar kind of misconception about like being bisexual, for example, that there are a lot of really, really hurtful stereotypes about like, oh, well, someone's bisexual, they're just like, they're going to be gay at some point. Like that's not a thing. That's not how identity works. I also want to reiterate that like non-binary is under the trans umbrella. So transgender means a lot of different things. It's not just trans male, trans female. Non-binary is also under that. So I use the word non-binary, but I mean, I also identify as trans because non-binary is trans. So yeah, there's a lot of different kind of like nuances here about the terminology that like being non-binary is being trans. But also like it's not a precursor to anything. It's just respecting how someone identifies in that moment and understanding that that could change, and that's great.
Yeah, and some non-binary people say they're not trans, and some that would fit the definition say they're cis. So again, that's like a whole nother deepening. So we really hope that you'll join us and express that you want more of these community conversations, because the more people who are interested, you know how it goes. We just gather each other up and we have these deeper conversations where, perhaps we can all see each other because it's a more planned discussion group. So many different ways of doing this. So thank you.
And thank you both. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Mavi. This was excellent, well-informed. Your own history, your own experiences really add to the conversation, and just appreciate you so much. I do want to share with the rest of the attendees who are here that there is the Spahr Center has a lot of different resources available, and they are available for coaching, etc. However, if there is something that is happening in the middle of the night, or you're worried about something, you're concerned about something, you have a question about something, there is a 24/7 line. It's the Trevor Lifeline. I'm going to put the phone number and the web address in the chat for you. So they are trained, they are knowledgeable, and they understand the LGBTQ facets of being. And so I encourage you to reach out to them if you find the need to do that. So Mavi, Jana, thank you again so much. Thank you for those of you who have joined us this evening, and look for an email in the coming days with more information. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.